This video will go over adding the structural columns, pile caps, and beams into our project. I'm going to go ahead and get into the main level view, and I'll start by loading in the specific columns that we're going to use for this project. The column tool sits on the structure tab, and we're going to use this in the structure panel, this column tool here. And before I place anything, I'm going to come to Load Family and find the Structural Columns folder. If you reference the handout, it tells us that these columns are going to be an HSS 6x6 by 0.625 column. The HSS stands for a hollow structural section. That's a tube column. And if I get inside this steel folder and come and find the hollow structural section family, I'll be presented with a catalog of all the different sizes that exist of this. And if I just scroll down and find the 6x6 by 5/8, that will be the size that we'll be using for our project. Select it, hit OK, and I now have that column loaded. Now, if you remember from class, we've had that discussion where columns by default want to go downward instead of upward. So before you place a column, I'm going to come in here to my options bar and change it from depth to specifying the height. And then the top of these columns should go up to the roof 1 level. Once I've made those changes, everything should be set for me to place the first column. Again, referencing the handout for dimensions, if I look at the first column that we'll place, will be along grid line C and a 10'8" from grid line 2. So here's grid line C and there's grid 2, and I want to just zoom in and place it 10 feet 8 inches away from grid line 2. And I'll place my first column there. After I've placed my first column, I want to create what's called a pile cap underneath that column. To create a pile cap, I'm going to go to the Isolated Foundation System and select Pile Cap. The pile cap there come in different sizes. The size that we're using for our project does not exist, so I'm going to create it from one that does exist by hitting Edit Type, Duplicate, and I'll give it a new size and change its name here. Referencing the drawings, it's a 60 by 60 by 28 inches. Change the name and then come in and change its size. Be 5 foot by 5 foot by 2'4". And then I'll have a new pile cap the right size for my project. To place that pile cap is real simple. I'm just going to go ahead and snap to the center of that tube column there and pick and place the pile cap. Also, that pile cap won't typically be flush with the floor level, so I'll go ahead and select this one and change its elevation to 4 inches below the floor so that we can pour our floor slab over top of that. There's different ways of doing that, and this is just one of those. So having done that, let's go take a look at this in the 3D view. If I've done things correctly, I should have a column there and a pile cap underneath it. Once I get the one placed, I can go ahead and copy those two to get the remaining. If I go back to my main level and I select the pile cap and the column, and then come to my copy tool, and referencing the drawing again, the distance between the one pile cap and the next one is 42 feet 8 inches to get me my second one. The next one that I can do is copy it, and this one I'm going to use my snap. So I'm going to snap to the center of that and place one here at the intersection of those two grids, and then I'll go ahead and copy again from its center to the intersection of the next grids. And I'll almost have that whole line of columns placed. If I look closely at that column there and where the firewall is, there's actually two columns that sit on either side of the firewall. We've had that discussion in class as to why that is the case. So what I'm going to do is first move this column from the center of the wall and offset it 9 inches. And then I'll take that same column and copy it from its center 18 inches to the other side to set that up. Once I have these columns created, I can just select all of them and copy them to grid line D. I'll go ahead and leave you to do that on your own. After you've copied the columns and pile caps to the next grid line, we need to come in and set those up so they look visually like they do on the handout. So I'm going to go ahead and select each of these pile caps by right mouse clicking, selecting one, and right mouse clicking, and then saying select all instances in the project, and it will get each of the pile caps. And then I'm going to right mouse click and override how they look in this view. So I'll say override graphics in view, and we'll go ahead and do this by element this time. I'm going to turn off their surface pattern, so I'll come to surface pattern and make that not visible, and then I'll come under projection lines and change those to be a hidden line type, similar to what we did with the footings. And if I hit OK, I'll now get a change that occurs in the look of my pile caps. Once that's all done, we're now ready to load in and model in the beams that sit at the tops of these. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and shift to my roof 1 level and begin to set this up so that I can actually see my beams when I get them modeled in there. First thing I'm going to do for that is come over here to my visibility and graphics in the properties box, scroll down and find structural columns and framing, and make sure those are selected. This is so that they're actually visible when I create them. Then I'll turn on my detail level and change it from coarse to fine. And then the last step in this process is to get to my view range and change my view depth to main level. When I do that, I should now be able to see the tops of my columns that I can then model in my beams with. To model in a beam, I'm going to go to my beam tool. It is again on the structure tab. Here's the beam tool. Before I get in there, I'm going to load family, find structural framing, come to wood because we're going to use a glulam for these beams. If I get into the wood folder, you'll see that there's two glulam families, a western species and a southern pine. We're going to use the western species. We had a discussion in class talking about the differences of those and referencing the section on our handout, the partial building section where those beams are called out. We're going to load up a 6.75 by 27 and also a 34.5. And if I select both of those and hit OK, I can load those up into my project at the same time. The 6.75 by 34.5 beams exist in the warehouse area, and the 27-inch depth beams exist in the storage areas. I'm going to shift over to the 34.5-inch depth, and then I'm going to simply model these beams from the wall to the column, and then I'll go from column to column. Down the one grid line and get those beams placed in there. Once I have those created, I can select each one of them. And then copy them to the grid line D. If I go look in my 3D view, I now have my glue-lams set in the locations that they need to be. I'm going to pick these 4 here in the storage area where the mezzanine slab is, change those to the 27-inch depth so that they're the proper depth.